We're the book friends that think good.
What does this mean for our life, for our world? Yiggity yeet, my dude. I'm happy to speak. Always happy to think.
I don't know how to do that. I can look into that.
Makes you sound like a book friend that can think good.
It's Jack and it's Weston.
BFTTGs. Yeah.
Jack, I think good. Sometimes I good think, too.
Makes you sound pretty good.
We might want to make it more concise. We are going to attempt to grapple and answer 3 questions. Number 1, what did we learn? Number 2, what did we disagree with? And number 3, what are we going to do about it? I am ready to roll.
I'm in it. Weston, my book friend, tell me, what book is it that we're thinking good about today?
Lying Weasels. You zesty?
Oh, I'm zesty today. Today, we are talking about Chapter 7 of A Field Guide to Lies and Statistics. How do we know?
How do we know?
How do we know?
It's the classic epistemological question.
Dude.
How do we know?
Glad you brought that up, bro, for later. I'm glad you brought that up. All right,
epistemology.
Jack, subtitles?
We'll get into it. Yeah, there are no subtitles. This is actually the introduction to the second part of the book, which is called Evaluating Words. And it's interesting. It opens with a quote from Alfred Lord Tennyson, which comes into play in the introduction, this introductory chapter of this part of the book. The quote is, "A lie which is half a truth is ever the blackest of lies." Essentially, what Levitin is making the case for in this introduction, and where he's kind of going, it seems like, as you evaluate words and like how words are used to lie, in the interpretation of facts or numbers, he's basically saying, like, we essentially get most of what we learn from authority, from people who have told us that these things are so. And he makes the case that it's really up to us to use our own wits and powers of reasoning to deduce whether people are actually telling us the truth or not. So, while he makes the point that we also absorb things implicitly or discover things ourselves, we are mostly told things by others. And that's really what the introduction is about. And it seems like as he goes, what he's going to be trying to do is give us tools to do exactly that, to think for ourselves and fact check the things that we're told.
Yep. And it was a pretty short chapter. And it made me go back and read a paper that I wrote. So remember last time how I talked about that paper that I wrote for my epistemology class?
Do you mean the point-specific determinism one? Or
No.
Oh, no.
I'm talking about the problem of testimony.
Yeah,
I think I mentioned that in the last episode. Well, I didn't have it, and it was on an old laptop. I didn't have anywhere to access it. I just remembered writing it, right?
Oh.
Well, life is serendipitous sometime, because my mom mailed me a bunch of junk.
A thumb drive of all old college papers.
Dude, I wish it was a thumb drive. I literally got a hard copy of it mailed to me by my mom. And I didn't tell her that I had just talked about it. She was like, treat. I found some of your old stuff, and just mailed it to me. And so you can see right here. Look at that.
Westing Epistemology.
There we go.
2011. Wow.
Yeah. We're throwing it back. We're throwing it back a decade.
A third of our lives.
So it's funny, reading this again and then relating it to this chapter and understanding the basic problem, at least as I understand it or understood it 10 years ago, with this sort of how we know with testimony is apparently it comes down to reductionist or anti-reductionist views. And the reductionist view, I might get these mixed up, but the reductionist view is basically saying that you have the right to rely on testimony only if you have reason to believe that testimony is reliable. So I think that's kind of what Levitin is arguing from the perspective of a reductionist epistemologist. I don't know. And
he's a reductionist
epistemologist. There we go.
Epistemologist.
Got it.
Epistemolarch.
And an anti-reductionist is someone that believes that you should assert that testimony is true until proven otherwise.
Okay. This is like what we do at court. This is the
Yeah.
defense attorney's whole thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it
Okay.
basically boils down to like those two things. And I wrote this whole giant 20-page paper on like the advantages and disadvantages to both.
Okay.
And then in classic Weston fashion at the end, my last paragraph, let me get to it on
You're
my
like,
paper.
after all, anti-reductionist people are dumb.
No.
This is the right way.
I said this. Here's my last paragraph of this paper I wrote back when I was 20 years old too. So
Okay.
this is a long time ago. I'll leave you with an interesting thought. This whole paper is testimony to you, the reader, and you have the choice to either trust my testimony or deny it. Of course, you could research for further justification and verification of this testimony, or you could accept it as a foundational source of knowledge. I hope this paper gives you enough reason to form a belief either way.
Oh,
So I just left it open to interpretation. Classic.
interesting.
But yeah, so that was basically my understanding, is that it came down to the reductionist or the anti-reductionist. Basically,
Socratic.
believe people at face value, or only believe people if you have other justification for it. And I think
Okay.
that's what Levitin is kind of speaking to in this chapter, the reductionist point of view.
You are saying that he's presenting himself as reductionist.
I think so. I think so.
Okay. Yeah,
Would
I
you
would
agree with that?
Yes, I would strongly agree with that. He basically says there's no reason to believe testimony unless you must, or unless it's been proven. One of the things he said that is really, really interesting, I think, is on page 124. And he said, a big part of the problem here is the human brain often makes up its mind based on emotional considerations and then seeks to justify them. And the brain is a very powerful, self-justifying machine. He makes the case that he uses the example of people saying that, like, listening to Mozart makes you smart. And he says, well, wouldn't that be convenient? It's really nice to believe that you could just listen to classical music and be smart, right? Which is a powerful example that speaks to that tendency of our brain to want to believe the easy thing. And so I think I think there is a strong reductionist bend when we use that frame of reference here, because he is basically saying, like, what your brain is going to do is automatically want to believe things, and you should distrust that instinct.
Yeah. I thought about on that section, because I made a note there too, of like how I was just thinking about how funny it is, like, theological disagreements and discussions can, there's so many times where people will pick and choose what evidence to use from the Bible to support their arguments, either for or against a certain, belief or conception.
Yeah, it's so funny. I literally saw somebody saying, well, you can't proof text because of this, and then proof text it as a justification for why you can't proof text.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's hilariously ironic.
Yeah. It is very difficult to avoid that instinct in us where it's like, what's it called? Wishful thinking, right? Mm-hmm. We have these ideas and we just want to believe them, and then we just find evidence to support our beliefs rather than form our beliefs around the evidence that we see presented to us or that we run into.
Oh yeah. No, totally. That's 100% true. I actually kind of had this happen to me recently with something that we were doing in our house build. I personally wanted to do a very specific thing with our it's getting into the minutia of it is kind of annoying, but essentially I wanted to do something like specific with our infrastructure, and I was like really lobbying for it with Lindsay and like trying to explain like why this is so important. And I was just finding all of these articles that like justify my point of view or like little pieces of information. But the reality is, like, once we talked to our contractor, he explained like the other side of it. And I was like, oh, I was like really pushing for something that I really honestly didn't even have a stake in. I just like felt passionate about it for no reason. And decided like, I believe this and I'm sticking to it and we're going to do it. And I think that happens to me a lot, but I think that we're just guilty of doing that often, believing things that we want to believe.
Dude, I did it on Sunday. So
Oh, yeah.
as of this recording, Sunday was the first week of the NFL season. And usually myself, my wife, my brother, who is it this year? I don't know. There's like 6 of us, including like my dad and my father-in-law. And we are doing a survivor pool. So you have to pick one team to win in that week. You're just trying to survive. If your team loses,
Oh.
we're actually doing like a 3 strikes, you're out sort of thing this year. So I picked the Colts, and the Colts tied. So instantly we had like a controversy on our hands. Week 1. It was like, well, wait, does the win count as a strike? Or does a tie count as a strike? Or
is it a win?
Or is it,
yeah,
they didn't lose, so they should go on. And I was like, instantly, I was thinking in the spirit of Survivor, even though it was mine, I was like, well, no, that's not a strike because they survived. Like, they didn't lose. I was picking a team to not lose. But then there are other people, because we had a group chat going about it, we're like, well, what happens? And it was like, there were other people that were like, no, like, that's a strike. They didn't win. So then we had to so then I was basing off like, well, it's called the Survivor, right?
Yeah.
But then we had done some Google research, and like my wife found some articles that were like, well, if you're doing a Survivor, typically it's like they have to win. Like a tie still counts as a loss.
Yeah.
So then we decided.
And this is where I'd be totally non-reductionist and be like, no. My wrestling coach in high school always said that if you tie, you've lost.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Something like well, and it was hard for me because I was one of the picks involved that picked the Colts. So it was like, well, anything coming from me is going to sound like I'm just trying to make it like for my benefit.
Listen, you guys, here's why I should stay in this thing.
Right.
Let me tell you.
But I was honestly thinking that. And I would have argued that for anyone that had tied. I would have been like, look, they should not get a strike for that. But either way, coming from me, it comes off a certain way.
Yeah, right.
But,
given your position, like that's a really interesting thing too, is like, it's not just your opinion, it's also your position. And like, when you put those two things together, it muddies the waters.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
But like, you may have the same opinion regardless,
and it's hard to convince people of that. Right.
Yeah.
Because
I mean, that's one of the things about timing that's so interesting. Like, I think about like presidential candidates or whatever. It's like, what if this person ran for president like now or at this time rather than that time, or other things like sports is a really good example. Like, man, what if so and so hadn't been there for that play or that season, or
if so and so had injuries, right? The injuries, the greatest what ifs.
Yeah. So Weston, learnings from this section.
So the next page is kind of where he starts his dissection of his own, quote at the beginning, where he talks about how he kind of does a gotcha moment on us as the reader.
Yeah.
And says, hey, here's the quote that I put at the beginning of the book. You probably didn't even question it at all. And the quote doesn't come from that person. And here's all the research that shows like it doesn't. There's all these iterations over the years. And he talks about how all these quotes that are attributed to certain people, a lot of times are not actually coming from that person, and they're like paraphrases. They're not verbatim. It's really hard to capture that stuff verbatim, even if it was written down. So I just thought it was a great kind of gotcha moment for me, where I was like, you got me.
Yeah.
You got me. Right.
Yeah. No, I know. I was thinking about that too. Like, that Mark Twain quote is really quite famous because of An Inconvenient Truth and The Big Short, which are both places I had also seen it.
Yep.
And then in this book, which immediately, what's really funny? Because he opened the book with that quote, I was like, oh, this is a good book, because The Big Short is a good movie.
That's
and
funny.
So is An Inconvenient Truth, right?
That's funny.
so
dude.
So I was kind of like, oh, interesting. He used that Mark Twain quote. That's so smart. But it's not even Mark Twain. It's some other dude who I've never heard of. And that was a big learning for me, was like the expert that he talks to, who's like an expert on quotations. 2 learnings for me. One, the first thing she said, which is, quotations are tricky. They're the literary equivalent of statistics. Really, in terms of lies, damn lies.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. And then the second thing was poor Josh Billings being second most famous humorist puts you in a precarious ground 100 years later.
Yep.
And that just got me thinking. That just got my wheel spinning. I don't know if it's a learning, but I was like, whoa, I wonder how much is misattributed and how much we could learn from the second best guy, or the second best woman or person or whatever,
Right.
that has just been totally lost to history.
Yep.
Because of things like this.
Yep. I know. It's just it kind of got me it got me down. Got me down a little bit, where I was just like, dude, what is the point of all this? Right? It's
I know.
There's like, you can do everything right in your life, and then some idiot 100 years later will misquote you or not give you credit for things that you worked your ass off to accomplish. Yeah, I don't know.
So
was that kind of leads me to my
was that Weston? No, that was definitely Jack who said that.
Yeah, for sure.
When people are listening to BFTTG
Yeah,
pod
100 years from now, yeah, the one viewer.
Yeah, in their flying cars by just with their brain sync.
This led to my pushback, my disagreement.
Okay, tell me.
Especially because this was such a short chapter, right? So it's kind of, there's not much left to talk about with the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
I disagreed with the handling of this concept.
How so?
At the end, like I felt like it was too cold and dystopian in a way. There's no hope or even a sliver of hope left over after reading this chapter. And it honestly left me not wanting to even read any more of the book. It left me not wanting to read the next section at all.
Interesting.
And I was just kind of like, I wanted to just put it down and be like, F it. Like, why?
Yeah.
So that was my pushback. I felt like he needs, and this is becoming a theme now, where I feel like he needs to wrap up these chapters in a little bit more positive way. And I'll probably, I don't know. We'll see how the next chapter goes, but I don't know. I didn't feel good after reading this.
I would agree with that. I think that there is a pessimistic undertone to this book. I mean, he quotes Kurt Vonnegut, famous pessimist. So it goes, he says, which is funny. It makes me wonder, is that by Kurt Vonnegut or not? Yeah. Anyway, I think that the pessimistic undertone of this is a little bit overblown. That's my pushback. I think that it's not as dire as he makes it seem. Like,
I mean, he makes it seem like we shouldn't believe anything we ever see ever.
Right.
Like,
and I think the reality of that is, like, the things that are passed down as like gospel truth have been tested over and over and over and over again. Right. Like, this is one of the things, this is one of the reasons that I am a big proponent of the Bible. Why I think the Bible is important, because there's no document in human history that has been so thoroughly critiqued by so many eyes for so many generations. And it's like, well, it stood the test of time. It's still here. People still believe it. They still read it. They still trust it, even with all of this like mountain of criticism. I think the same is true of other things. Like, look at like science, like physics. Like, there are physics properties like Isaac Newton's laws. They've been tested and tested and tested and tested and tested, and it's like, this just works. So we know it. But the reality is, like, does it even matter who said that Mark Twain quote?
That's what I was going to say. Like,
because like it's inconsequential.
Yeah, the quote has survived because it's an important concept, not because of who said it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree.
Like,
I agree with that.
Changing the who said it to anybody else in the world makes no difference to me. It's still like, oh, that's an interesting quote.
Yeah, because when I first read it in there, I didn't recognize it from The Big Short. But I also, like, I don't know, I didn't really even care that it was Mark Twain. You know, I didn't. I was just like, oh, that's a good concept. You know, that's like a good thing to like think about. Not like, ooh, Mark Twain is so smart. Like, that is not my thought, you know?
It did though. This was an interesting thing for me. When I learned about Josh Billings, I was like, who is Josh Billings? I'm kind of curious about this guy now. Want to like read up on him a little bit.
Did you
see if he has some other sayings?
Yeah,
I didn't. Okay. I haven't looked into him, but that was something that made me think, like, you know, the learning from earlier, like, how many second best people have we passed over? And maybe we should like give them a closer look.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are we going to do about it?
You actually led into that for me, which is he is really prompting us to fact check. And the thing that I said about Mark Twain just now, how you could change the byline of that quote and it wouldn't change the quote for me at all. The skeptic side of me, which this book is really trying to push me into, like to say like, hey, be skeptical, must be tempered with the question, do I care? That's my big takeaway from this section, actually, is kind of like maybe the inverse of what he says, where before I waste my time fact checking something or like perseverating on some issue, maybe I need to ask myself, like, does this matter? Do I really care? Like, if Mark Twain didn't say this quote, does that have any material impact on my life? Because there's lots of things that you could spend your time constructing. But there's a lot of energy that goes into that.
Yeah. Yeah. It made me think of the famous quote by Mark Twain. No, I don't know. I just know the phrase.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
No, not that. I was thinking of the, it's easier to blow down a house of cards than to build one. Like you were saying, it's a lot easier to deconstruct things than it is to build things.
Yeah.
And that's something I've run into a lot in my education career and like just in my classroom, where it's like I've put in all this work to, construct this house of cards, so to speak, and build up a certain community or a certain aspect or a certain project or something that we've been working on. And then, I'll have other teachers come in and just critique it to death. Right. Or say like, oh, well, that's not good because of this. That's not good because of that. And then what we're left with is just, all right, well, now we have to start from square zero. And now we don't have any plans for tomorrow. Whereas like, I think there's a lot of salvageable things in that.
Yeah.
So I've definitely run into that a lot where, and sorry, I get frustrated with that because usually what happens is I'm the one creating all this stuff. And then I'll have, teammates or coaches or whatever come in and then they'll just destroy it, but then not try and build anything back with me. I'm just like, well, all right, try again. And I'm like, what? Like I spent hours on that. But
yeah, no kidding. Yeah, it's a lot easier to tear things down than to build them up.
Yeah,
for sure.
I mean, I don't know. What am I going to do about it? I said, not that I did before, but I'm never going to trust a politician. This section made me think of how it was discovered, or rather rediscovered. I don't know, a year or so ago, whenever the election was happening. That like I saw these clips of like Biden. Just I don't know if you saw these. He stole like whole speeches from like other people. Throughout his whole career. Like there's some like 1980 that I'll try and link some in the description if I can find it again. But like I saw this video that like showed like, God, I want to say one of them was like MLK. Like one of them was a big name that he like, JFK. I think it was JFK. And he just totally just stole the whole speech and said it 20 years later. Yeah. And no one said anything, right? He said in like 1980, no one said anything. And then he stole another one from someone else and used it like 20 years after they had done it. I don't know. Look, I'm not trying to pick sides here, but I just saw, I don't think Biden's the only one. I'll say that.
Yeah, no kidding. But, yeah. And and to be fair, just to balance it, he does talk about Trump also just making stuff up.
Yeah, all the
I think that might be in the next chapter.
I think that might be in the next chapter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, because this author never mentioned Biden. It was just me connecting that.
Right.
So.
Yeah. But they're both just trying to bend narrative to
whatever
make
their will, whatever they need to happen.
Clear bias, right? Like elect me.
For sure.
Give me power and money.
All right. Well,
as Mark Twain would say, bye for this time, guys.
Thank you for joining us, book friends. Next week on the BFTTG pod, Jack and Weston, they're thinking good some more with you. our book friends. Check out the show notes or the description, comment section for a link to the book and any articles that we talk about in the show. Bye-bye, book friends.
Bye for this time, guys.
Do a good thing today.
I love you.
Love you too, dude.